Guys, we're not muted anymore.
It is one of those things that drives me crazy.
Yep. FBI work started January 6th.
Yep.
Remember, we're live, everyone.
Okay, KCRB.
Yes, so yeah, everyone, we're live streaming to YouTube, and we're recording, so we're good to go.
Okay, welcome everybody. This is our MTEAM, our management team budget meeting. Let's just quickly go around the room and say who is here. I'm Katie Jacobson. I'm the county commissioner, and I am going to be kind of facilitating today's festivities.
I'm Joe Davidson, county assessor.
Jane Welch, Lincoln County Treasurer Tax Collector. Jane Romero, Health and Human Services Director.
Chris Landers, Lincoln County Sheriff.
Adam Shanks, Administrative Lieutenant Sheriff's Office.
Anna using Lincoln County Planning Department Director.
Eli Adam, Lincoln County Surveyor.
Dana Jenkins, Lincoln County Clerk. Todd Richmond, IT Director.
Cindy Bruce, Lincoln County Transit.
David Collier, Human Resources Director.
Tony Tampa, Community Justice Director.
Deanna Gravel, Assistant Finance Director. Kristen Ewell, Legal Counsel.
Claire Hall, County Commissioner, and it looks like we've got some people online as well.
Christina.
Christina Shear,
Oh.
Finance Director and Budget Officer.
And then Casey, I think we have a couple of our MC members online. If we want to make sure they're there.
Yeah, looks like we've got Laney and Roy online, and we have one citizen.
Okay.
Do we have Tim?
I thought Tim was going to join
He
us.
registered himself.
Yeah, I do not see Tim.
Okay, check in.
I'll go work on that.
Okay. Hey, can you click that off, Casey, so we can see the agenda again?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
All right, Christina, I'm gonna hand it over to you.
And so actually, we're going to be on the presentation, sorry. Here, why don't I take the mouse and I'll advance it. There we go. Okay. Okay, so this meeting is traditionally held just to give the MTEAM an opportunity to ask questions, to have discussions, and talk about the budget before it is formally proposed and published for consideration by the Budget Committee. So just briefly, I'm going to go through, how do I do this? Guess that way. Nope.
No, see the little arrows up and down?
There, that
There
one.
you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the budget process, just by way of review, in January and February, finance starts making personal services calculations because that forms the baseline of our budget for the coming year. Those are issued to departments for them to review and make changes to both materials and services and capital outlay if necessary. That happens in March. That's the departmental budgets. MTEAM review, that's this meeting right now. In early May, we will finalize the proposed budget. And that will go to the Budget Committee in late May for consideration. The rest of the process, once the Budget Committee approves the budget, it will go to the Board of Commissioners for adoption. That happens in June. There is a formal notice of hearing that is published for that. It's a very formalized public notice that includes all kinds of details, usually in very, very small print in the newspaper. But our budget will also be published on the website at that point. Once the public hearing is held and adopted, we file the official budget and the tax levies with the assessor's office. And then we move into what we call an execution mode, which is basically we implement the budget and we use it to finance our operations for the coming year. Any questions on the process before I move on?
Did I miss that there's a budget committee, right? Is that
The budget committee is formed of, comprised of the Board of Commissioners and citizen members.
Does everyone have, I don't think it's in this packet, but the budget committee schedule?
because that's usually a pretty important part.
Yeah, it's on here, late May, budget committee.
The actual dates are May 17th and May 24th.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Christina.
Yes.
So the live stream sounds really good. We can hear everyone, and Tim will be joining us in just a second. Okay.
Okay, good. So, as a practical matter, the general fund is the discretionary funds of the county, and it is also the fund where we tend to put most emphasis and effort in terms of discussing the budget. So we're going to do a brief overview of the general fund. Basically, budgets are balanced so that sources and uses equal. That's what a balanced budget means. Sources are beginning balances, transfers in, and revenues. This chart shows how our budget is organized. You can see that beginning balance is a decent chunk. Transfers in is part of this as well, but property taxes make up the bulk of our general fund revenues. The other taxes category includes transient occupancy tax and some minor other little taxes. Another major component of the general fund budget is intergovernmental revenues. This is revenues received from another government or government-like organization. It could be the federal government, it could be the state, could be local jurisdictions, but that's what intergovernmental revenue is. Charges for services is exactly what it sounds like. They're fees for services performed by the county. Fines is a relatively minor part of it, of our revenue stream overall, but it is there. And miscellaneous is there as well.
What kinds of things would be miscellaneous?
These are usually intermittent things that come to us that are just not part of our normal operations. So sometimes they're very small revenues, grants, refunds. A lot of times they are refunds.
Kind of one-offs.
They're generally one-off revenues. If it's something that's regular and recurring, we almost always put it in a category somewhere else. Any other questions about sources before we move on?
I'll just note that Tim Johnson has now joined us. Welcome, Tim.
Okay, moving on to uses. Uses are exactly what it sounds like. They're expenditures. General fund expenditures are broken down by category here and include general government, public safety, community services, and support services. We budget the general fund at a program level, which means we assign these programs, general government, public safety, and community services. The support services element is part of the general government appropriation, but it is broken out here for illustrative purposes. Is there any questions about usage?
Yes.
Yes.
So support services, that would be like IT for the internal functions and others that are part of general fund.
Yes, it's IT, finance, personnel,
Okay.
legal, and also facilities. Okay, moving on. Sorry, I'm working two different things here for. We made several assumptions when building the draft budget that we are currently working under. We funded 100% currently authorized and not frozen positions. So if they are vacant, we funded them at step one with family medical dental benefits. If the position is currently occupied, we funded it based on the current occupant. So what their range step is and what their current benefits are. So as the corollary for that is that when we have turnover, there are going to be changes. You know, there's always changes. You know, somebody will have a different set of benefits. They may come in at a different step. But this is how we set the base budget for personal services. Step and longevity increases are per the collective bargaining agreements that are in effect as of July 1. What that means is there is no COLA for LCDA or LCDA non-represented employees because that has not been negotiated yet. That contract expires June 30th. For LCEA and the other bargaining agreements, the COLAs that were included were per the collective bargaining agreement. There also is nothing currently budgeted for elected official increases because the compensation committee has not yet met. Questions about that before I move on?
What is a frozen position?
A frozen position is one that had previously been filled but was either given up or reclassed to another position.
And is there a date for the compensation committee to meet?
May 2nd is the first meeting, and then they'll be at the budget committee meeting on May 17th.
Medical and dental cost increases were included in this budget per the CIS estimates. Those are roughly 10%. It could be a little bit less. Dental is liable to be a little bit less, but medical could possibly be a little bit more. So we basically took a base estimate. For the rest of the budget for materials and services, the instruction or the assumption that we had is that they were going to be flat unless we had a contractual or legal reason to increase. And generally that means leases, contracts, service agreements that we have no option on. You know, things like software agreements, they tell us how much they're going to charge us. That's what we put in because that's what we're going to pay. We don't have a choice on those. All other materials and services we're assumed to be held flat. Any other questions about our assumptions? Okay.
But in an inflationary environment, does that trouble us that you say they're flat, but we know they're not?
It presents a challenge. Okay, moving on.
Ouch.
This is one of the slides that everybody wants to see, and it's basically our projected ending fund balance. You'll see history from fiscal 15 forward through fiscal 20, our estimated fiscal 21, and then also our estimated fiscal 22. And you'll see that has dropped off considerably. That is due to the way we budgeted last year. We did budget a decline last year. And we are showing if all else stays the same, based on the assumptions that we just talked about, it would decline again in fiscal 23. This will be the end of fiscal 23. So remember, we're always talking about ending balance here after we've expended for the year. The board goal is $8.8 million. That's based on 2 months of operating expense, funding compensated absences, and funding debt service for 1 year. That's what comprises that $8.8 million. Our current request budget that we're looking at right now is sitting at $3.3 million. So there's a difference of $5.5 million between the board goal and what this current working document shows. Claire.
Off the top of your head, do you have an estimate of if we did finish at 3.3 million, how many days of operating expenses that would leave us approximately?
I might have that number here. Oh, sorry.
Well, while you're checking that, I'll channel Commissioner Hunt in absentia, who would no doubt be pointing out right about now that this is not a sustainable path.
It would be less than 30 days.
Okay, thank you.
Does that begin to affect our ability to borrow, or is there a
Yes, it will.
point that we start
Definitely.
signaling to others that you're going to have to pay a higher rate?
Yes, it would definitely have an impact on our financial position relative to debt. I mean, we do have some things going for us. We have relatively strong tax revenues, and we have very little debt, comparatively speaking. But generally speaking, you want to see a robust general fund that is operating with a surplus, not with, not barely making it.
Some of us have been down this road before, and we don't want to get there again if we can avoid it.
Yeah, and I don't, you don't want to overstate these
Mhm.
numbers or overreact to these, because generally speaking, we do, always do better than what we show here. The question is always, how much better do we do? And that's the question that, we as a team need to ask is how can we do better? And how do we make it so that these do not come to pass the way they are? There's two prongs to that. We can spend less in the current year, which would raise our beginning fund balance for next year, and thereby raise the ending fund balance for next year. And we can spend less going forward. There's a flip side to all of that. You can balance a budget in two ways, and all of you who know me have heard me say this before. There are two ways to balance a budget. You can cut spending or you can raise revenue. There are some areas where our ability to raise revenue are relatively limited. For instance, we can't just raise taxes. That doesn't work. However, we can look at finding alternative revenue sources for other things. We can look at grants. We can look at other kinds of federal funds. We can look at state funds. We can look at raising fees. There are all kinds of ways to raise revenue. And those are options that are available in balancing a budget. Questions before we move on?
Tim has a
Oh,
question.
yeah, Tim has
Tim.
his hand up.
I think you have to, can you go into the?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you. Christina, if I'm looking at the chart correctly, in 2021 fiscal year, we finished over $10 million in the fund balance reserve account.
Yes.
You've got this identified as fund balance and reserve. Could you explain to the group why we have both a fund balance and a reserve? Because typically, based upon a policy of an elected group, be a commission, typically the reserve is separate and a fund balance is separate from the reserve. So you've combined the two?
Yes, it's a generalization. The ending fund balance in a fund is the combination of funds reserved and funds left over from the operating budget. So in our case, we only had about $500,000 worth of unappropriated ending fund balance or reserves, because that's the debt service reserve. The rest of it was really budgeted as contingency.
Okay. So let's carry that on just for a moment. Sorry to elongate this, commissioners, but importance for me to understand this. So when you're looking at FY21 and we were over $10 million, the current pattern for 2022 is taking us to just above $6 million, correct?
Yes.
Has there been, or will there be any, you identified earlier on within the context of your discussion or your presentation that we always do better. Any insight that you can provide the M team relative to where that pattern might be based upon the trend that on this chart that you have?
Generally speaking, we underspend our personal services by about $1 million, or about 7.5%. This year it's going to be less than that. My best guess, based on past trends, is that we could perhaps underspend by $1 million, maybe $2 million, if we're careful. But we're at the path that we're going right now in terms of filling vacancies. It's hard to say.
Okay, so again, not to elongate the conversation, but I think tantamount to the success of us moving forward through the rest of this fiscal year and into next, you're apparently identifying to me that, and to us, that there could be a flattening of this curve. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay.
And
within
given our history, go ahead.
Within the context of that, when might we know and when can we expect another analysis illustrating that?
Unless I receive different information on projections, the fiscal 22 number will not change. I fully expect the fiscal 23 number to change based on decisions made by the Board of Commissioners and this group to to adjust our expenditures and our revenues for fiscal 23.
Thank you.
To answer Tim's question, you'd have to have a really good, you'd have to be able to project vacancy rates, right? Because that's where the lion's share of that cushion or that flexibility or that conservative budgeting comes from. And that'd be hard to do, right? Because
At this stage in the game, and we're in late April, our personnel services are pretty much baked at this point. So we pretty much know what that's going to be. So any improvement in fiscal 22 numbers is probably going to come on the revenue side or with materials and services savings.
Could we get David's input on this?
I mean, I think we're still struggling to get people. So yeah, I mean, I don't see, but if we do like kind of Jane's proposal with maybe another recruiter to help recruit and we are successful, which on one hand would be good. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, I guess.
Mhm.
Sure, we want to fill
Yeah.
jobs and provide services, but we also.
You may not see that at this fiscal year, though. I mean,
No.
it started in
Not,
May, you would-
no, not this fiscal.
Yeah.
But the
Maybe
coming
next-
year.
Coming
Yeah.
fiscal year, yeah. we can.
Which makes the issue of vacancy a thorny one. You know,
Mhm.
our historical vacancy rate is about 7.5% dollar wise. Not person wise, but in terms of dollars, we traditionally over the last 10 years or so tend to underspend our base personnel services expenditures by about 7.5%. The last 2 years that we've done budgeting with me, we have actually in one form or another budgeted that savings in advance to increase our projected ending fund balance. We do not include a vacancy savings rate in this budget, and that is something that we need to discuss today. If we did a 7.5% vacancy savings, that would amount to $2.2 million. That's spread across all departments and all programs. And we know for a fact that that does not happen. Some programs, specifically public safety, tend to generate more simply because they have more employees. Some departments are very small, very stable, do not turn over even in our current environment, have not turned over very much. Those departments don't generate savings. As a matter of fact, they tend to overrun their base projections. Jane.
I just have a question. Is the HHS budget included in these projections?
In this analysis, no.
So then, to your point, David, I think
Yeah.
our vacancies would
not,
not
yeah.
hit this. Yeah.
They do not help there, yeah. So in this context, we're specifically talking about the general fund.
thank you for that, because I recall that was how we sort of finalized, that was the very tail end of either last year or the year before.
Both years.
How we sort of arrived at a budget number we felt comfortable with, especially vis-a-vis reserves, had to do with the vacancy rate.
Yes.
And then we thank you for that, because we budgeted that in.
And
Right.
send
Kind
this-
of, that was expressed at the,
You have transit service district money that wouldn't be in this either, right?
That is correct.
Yeah, okay, so your
We
vacancies.
don't do any
any.
general fund.
Yeah.
So if I could clarifying,
Mhm.
the 2.2 million potential savings, that's strictly for general fund
That's strictly
supported.
for the general fund.
Okay.
Roughly 1.4 million of that is public safety, which is both sheriff, jail, and juvenile.
Question.
And adult community justice too.
We have our state.
No, they
funds.
have a separate
Oh,
fund.
yeah, sorry, okay, sorry.
The DA's office too, right?
Yes, it does include the DA's office.
Question on this, of course, looking at the graph and the data, we flattened the curve between 18 and 21. 20 and 21 probably was a result of the vacancy savings. 22 is projected to go down, 23 is projected to go down even further. How are those projections made? And then have you done any anecdotal projections out maybe 5 years to see if, again, I think, doing vacancy savings the last couple of years is trying to see if we were going to turn this around either as, simply, like you put it, more revenue or less expenditures, but is it time to make a decision on something like that to make sure that we're trending back upwards?
I'll say I've done projections, but I've not published anything. I mean, these are basically the accountant's equivalent of the back of the envelope kind of thing. if I run these out on just a straight line, normal projection, they're gonna run us negative next year. That's not, it's not particularly useful in that the government, a government like ours would never do that. As a functional, we would make changes. And that 22 number is right now, or the 23 number that we're showing is literally just a point projection based on the information we have now and based on the decisions we make about our assumptions going forward. That number will change. It may not even show up in the proposed budget. And even if it did, the budget committee could very well say, we can't live with this number, we're going to make some changes. And that's what this conversation is all about.
And those assumptions, then, how are you calculating based on what is coming in from the taxes compared to what we're putting out? What's percentage, or how are you basing that?
Well, the historical tax revenue increase is about 3% per year. It's not very much. And when our personnel services trending over 10 years is double-digit inflation. And those are the assumptions that we're making. So when Jane puts together her assumptions for tax revenue, she's looking at our historical tax rates, what we're allowed in terms under the law in terms of increases, and that's what we put in there. Sometimes we get more because we'll get collections on foreclosures and things like that. But generally speaking, over time, and governments are a long-term organization, the last 20 years, it's 3%. I mean, you can just basically lock that in. It's 3%. We're going to get 3% on our tax revenue.
They may put Joe on the spot here, but did you mention at one time they 4% we're looking at with growth, and then
yeah, the last couple of years with this housing market and all the development that's going on, that's new property assessed value that's going on the roll. So in addition to the Measure 53% increase that we see under law, we've got a lot of development going on. It's on those.
Amen.
And that's all new revenue.
There's
on
some
the roll,
high dollar
above and
places
beyond.
being built here that
Right.
are gonna kick some zero. That's why that's why the dissonance that I would have is that we're saying at 3%, but I know it's more complicated than that. I can see that look on your face. Yes, of course it's more complicated than that, but that's from front of square that in my own mind. Yeah.
Did we budget 3% last year in our projections? Or
Yes.
Did we?
And we came in at about 3.25.
3.25. Okay.
Yeah, because here's the thing, when you talk about new development, you're talking about a very small segment of our tax rolls.
Yeah.
It's still not the bulk of your tax roll. Your bulk of your tax rolls is very, very stable. And so even if you do get a period of high growth, you're talking about an increase of 0.5%,
Yep.
maybe 3/4 if you have a really good year. You're not talking 2 and 3% of property taxes. Because it takes a lot to move that dime or that needle. But at the same time, personnel services historically grows at roughly 10%. So if you do not constantly put downward pressure on your staffing, you're going to always have a disconnect between your revenue and your expense. In a straight fee for service kind of environment, you would be raising fees. In an HHS environment, you're staffing based on your available resources. Same with transit, same with roads. The general fund should be doing the same thing. But what our baseline assumptions are is that we are taking what we're doing today and continuing it tomorrow and thinking about what else we want to do. And that is a recipe for us always, every year, having this conversation about fund balance going down and then figuring out how to level it so that it really stays kind of at a level. Really our target, like I say, $8.8 million at this point. We've done better than that in the past, but I will tell you some of that is COVID money came in for reimbursements and that benefited us to a certain extent. And so we can't make those same assumptions going forward.
An increase in interest rates, it's not like we've got enough in the bank. That's also doesn't really move the needle. Either that's a rounding error when it comes to
interest.
It cuts both ways, right?
It cuts both ways. And we don't have a lot of debt, so we don't see the downside risk on that. And the debt that we have is very low interest. But The interest that we're earning is practically non-existent at the moment, has not changed yet enough to even consider.
Dinosaurs observation, I remember when I was brand new and we were getting like something like 325,000 a year in interest, but that seems to have vanished a long time ago.
Yeah, about 4.5 years ago, we were at 2.75% at the pool. As of the first of the year, we were at 0.45%. We've now increased to 0.65%.
Oh,
So,
boy.
Yeah.
It's significantly dropped.
And Jane, collections are doing fairly well. Now.
Collections are good. With this next trimester, it's our goal, excuse me, to probably be at about 98.5 to 99% collections. So collections are good.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Again, dinosaur memory. I think when I came in, we were barely, we were lucky each year to get to like 91, 92%, but they put enough incentives in place, made it so expensive to pay late that it's really, that has worked.
Okay, just to continue on our discussion, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, but there are definitely options for improving the ending fund balance. We can look at fiscal 22 projections again, but that would again require all of you to tell us where those projections could be improved in terms of expenditures or in terms of new revenue collections. For 23, we can look at, again, relooking at our revenue projections, particularly in the areas of grants and other external revenue sources, looking to see if there's anything that we missed, anything that we might possibly be able to count on. We can look at increased fees. We can also look at alternative ways of funding our operations in terms of, is there another way to fund what I'm doing? Either by implementing a fee or by getting a grant or by doing a partnership or something. Anytime that you take a general fund dollar and supplant it with an external revenue source, it's a good thing. And so we could look at those kinds of things. And then of course you can look at expenditures. You can look at, go ahead and budget a vacancy savings factor like we did before. The trick is if we do that, we've got to make it, which means that we can't 100% fund all of our positions 100% of the time for the year. It's a practical matter, we wouldn't, but the question is, how much do you count on that? And what do we look at? We can also look at other interfund kinds of activities. The general fund supports a lot of activity in other funds. Do we want to look at how those activities are funded? Questions?
Christina, I may have missed, did you mention how we're doing on our vacancy savings this year? Did you report on that?
I did not, because I don't have a strict factor for that. We are definitely running under, and some departments definitely did a good job of capturing that in their projection numbers.
Okay.
So to a certain extent, that's already captured in that fiscal 22 ending balance.
At the risk of asking an elementary question, but if there's an opportunity to turn to external sources and even fee increases and things like that, is there any problem? I mean, those are aspirational. We haven't got those grants yet. We haven't raised those fees yet. Is there anything inhibiting us from a budgetary perspective of just building those assumptions in, right? Those are promises we're making basically to the budget that we're going to do those things.
Budgets are always built based on assumptions. But remember that you build those assumptions, you still have to live with the results.
Yeah.
So if you, for instance, say somebody's going to land from Mars and give us $10 million, and we build our budget based on that, and that doesn't happen, then we're in a mode where we have to cut mid-year. So you want to be very, very careful about your assumptions going in. That being said, budgets are always based on assumptions, and they are always wrong. We will adopt a budget through the budget committee and through the board of commissioners. And what we actually spend will be less. What we actually get in revenue will be different than what we did. That's the way budgets work. Budgets are guesses, they're plans. The more sure you are about something, the easier it is to include in the budget. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
So that kind of brings us to the final thing that we normally include, which is the list of requests the departments have made to increase their base budget beyond their current operations. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that based on our current iteration of the budget, there isn't an awful lot of room to consider these unless we're looking at alternative revenue sources.
Why are some highlighted in yellow?
The ones highlighted in yellow are positions.
Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah.
Okay.
Curtis, which ones of these were also ARPA requests?
The records management system and the
The
network
switch.
switch replacement.
Network, okay.
And that's a requirement. We're out of compliance procedures.
Yeah,
So
it was really put into where do you want to take it out?
On the network switch replacement?
Yeah. And the RMS is almost a must too, because otherwise we're going to be left outside of all the other agencies, and not only in our county, but in the Tri-County that we dispatch for. Basically put it off a year, because I had requested it last week, but January 1 of this next year is almost a must to get that.
Let's circle back with Tim maybe after this. I have time if you do. On those two regarding ARPA, yeah.
So that's why I really put them into both. It's just where you want to money from.
Yeah.
It really does.
Okay. So those might come off.
And I came up with the second environmental health specialist for our department, go on and on about how important, I won't. I was doing the same thing. It's like I thought it might be an ARPA thing, and now I'm hearing it probably doesn't make that much sense to do it ARPA. But I just want to say the good news is I have a new $80,000 to be able to dedicate to this position, because we've tightened up our ability to do certain kinds of reviews in our department on certain kinds of septic systems, and we're projecting that's going to yield another $80,000 for that particular function.
From fees.
From existing fees. So we don't even have to take, we're just, along with half the departments in the state, we're really finally getting after that one piece that a lot of us have not been able to do because of resources. And I'm shocked that
Okay, sorry, Anna, I was
Please.
making up. So say that again. What are you doing with septics?
so in the context of, yes,
Yeah.
because I'm all in, like, let's try to make sure we know how we're gonna pay for these.
Well, I have an
things.
idea, but tell me what you said.
Okay, well, but a good news thing is that we have been able to tackle making sure that we're following through with our full responsibilities under our program to make sure that annual maintenance contracts on advanced treatment systems, which there are more and more of, so it's an expanding universe. We've now dedicated the staff time to get on top of that. And the revenues so the people there have been a lot of people that haven't been paying those, don't even know they're supposed to do them. So they're happening now, and the projected revenue, new revenue, unaccounted and anything else, so it's brand new money, is going to be another $80K a year for our department, which I'm just offering up. That's a good start on the 140, much less things potentially with the vacation rental industry or other revenue sources.
Oh, no, let's chat maybe after this meeting or today or tomorrow, because I have $4 million, 2.5, which has already actually been funded, but I don't have the money yet to do septic system replacement for the whole county, but I have personnel time into that budget. And so maybe, see what I'm saying? Maybe maybe I can fund part of your position out of that money, because it is septics, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk. I'm not sure. I have to go back and maybe talk to the state about that. I put in my personnel costs a little broadly for just this kind of opportunity in case it
Well, if they would
came up,
be,
but
but if they would be reviewing the systems and signing off, then that's.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there's a direct,
Yeah.
that's not a stretch there. That's not all a stretch. I
there's
think
a,
that's
there's a
good.
connection. So let's sit
Yeah,
down and
very.
chat about that and see what we can do there. And I mean, I've been told that the money was approved a year ago, and I've been told it's gonna be here in 5 to 6 weeks for a year. So now they're saying August. I don't really know when it's coming, but hopefully soon. So
This is an example of exactly the exercise that all of us with these decision packages need to, try to have. It's like, how are you gonna pay for it?
yeah,
Right,
let's talk
and
about
this
that.
is also an example of something that I would recommend because of the uncertainty of it, that we would do, budget requests for it. So when the revenue comes in, then we can look at
And I had-
funding the
I
expenditures.
had talked to you about that, and we decided to wait until we actually had it in our hands.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
which I'm fine with, yeah.
So, long story short, it doesn't necessarily help the current proposed budget that we're talking about.
But it's good.
It is good.
So is this like one-time money that would get the position going and then you would
Well,
be able to bring in
The
that
good news
extra
about the
money?
new 80K, that's year in, year out and going to expand over time. Now,
Well, so-
this one grant thing, so it's a mix, right?
Maybe what you could do is front fund the position for the first 2 or 3 years with that grant money. And then build the revenue base, and so you can put it back on that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so for any of us though, that have in our departments that are thinking about going that route of grant funding, it's like, guess what? We all will stare at those people and say in 2 years, the clock strikes 12 and they're gonna turn into a pumpkin unless we
Yeah.
think through how we're gonna, so it's a challenge. There's a challenge.
Well, it's not something that I think the county is used to doing, to have strictly grant funded positions, but I was grant funded for 15 years before I came here, so it's like perfectly normal for me.
Well, James departments.
It's about being on grants, yeah.
We know that your department needs help.
No, I know, and I'm not, I'm just so happy to,
Yeah.
this was a good example, and I'm proud that this, this was like not found money, because we're just so glad that part of our program is getting done.
Yeah.
But it was eye popping for me, and I said, oh my God, it was good news, like, you mean we're gonna get another clean 80K a year because we've done this, and we needed to do it anyway, and we finally made it possible, because for a part-time person coming in who said, I'm gonna help you do that, and just mind-numbingly went through that. It was a huge task.
Okay, well, let's chat on it.
Yeah, great.
Okay. Was there anything else, excuse me, anybody had in here that was ARPA funds or that some other funding source has maybe come up since then? No grants for the riding lawnmower?
I would suggest that would be an operating expense that we would try and squeeze out of the current budget.
Makes sense.
I'm assuming our old riding lawnmower or something is no longer. Hey, Curtis, what, the radio replacement? Is that radios in cars, or is that radio tower? What is that?
No, portable radios are for vehicles
Okay.
on the jail and patrol.
Is that why there's two different ones?
Yeah.
One for,
Yeah, one for jail, one patrol. And I mean, it's something, that we were trying to replace them all at once because they're starting to fail. But, it's one of those things that we could add in a little bit and do like 10 on each side this year. 10 next year.
Let's, when we follow up with Tim, let's talk with him about that, because there is obviously an emergency response, public safety component to that, and maybe it fits in our bill. I don't know, may not, but it could. I mean, obviously you need to do radios during COVID.
And fires.
Yeah, all of that, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like that's something. Sometimes I think we need to think about regular, more frequent replacement of our equipment, kind of like we do in an IT context, where every year we're budgeting for a certain level of replacement.
Yeah.
So that we don't have these big hits. Now, I get radios are tough because you want them all to be the same, because
Yeah.
that makes them work.
We initially bought them all with grant money, I think, all at one time. too.
Yeah, and
now,
so, yeah. Yeah, it's just, it's a concept. And so that's something that we could look at long-term. I do want to address that the ergonomic furniture, that may be something that we can look at the self-insurance fund for. Because there is certainly a workers' comp element with that. That's just.
So this is a multiple request from everybody?
No, this is a general fund request.
Okay.
But, along the lines of looking for alternative revenue sources other than the general fund, it may be such a thing as that is appropriate for the self-insurance fund. We would need to look at that. Yeah.
Who's the request from? It just says general.
General government, that's for the tax and treasurer office.
Okay.
And the,
May I jump in here for a moment?
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. So a couple things I see on these decision packages relative to discretionary funding. Let me provide some positive insight here for all of you. One, you've had CARES Act that's moved on through. You have ARPA. You also have the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, which is equally as large as ARPA, which we have not even begun to tap at this particular point in time, which I think is tantamount. There are 4 pathways, 2 of which I've just mentioned, ARPA, IIJA. It's also followed by standard federal appropriations, which we need to spend more time looking at as it pertains to your asks and requests. The 4th element is, and one that I'm working with the commission on, is to ensure their discussion with our US senators on direct requests to be able to pursue things. Curtis, one of the things that I find fascinating in my career is the request that you have made over on this. Many of these provide opportunities in IIJA, and in fact, recently completing full body camera for my recent department through IIJA and a DOJ grant program. I've also talked with Todd and suggested that one of the things I did in San Diego was develop an overarching agreement with a provider. In this particular case, it was Toshiba. And in the 276 vehicles that we had simply for lifeguards, it was underwritten, the vehicles were underwritten for a test result by Toyota. And the vehicles, computers and equipment provided for law enforcement was from Toshiba at no cost to the jurisdiction. So there are options out there in these public-private partnerships I want us to take a look at. I also want us to take a look at alternatives relative to lease agreements too as well. Now, I recognize there's pros and cons on each. This is part of the discussion that I think we need to have as it moves forward on this process. And so when we get into budget committee, we have fully vetted this and they feel comfortable about the work that you're pursuing on this. This is a lot to add on to general fund, and I think that there are alternatives. I know there are alternatives that we can pursue, and I look forward to working with all of you on this. It's one of the puzzles of local government, and one that I feel very comfortable about helping all of you achieve. I also want to add that, you know, during last week, it was interesting. I told Casey, I said, the commissioners have a series of goals and objectives that they're looking at. And one of the things that after Measure 5, I noticed that Oregon did not pursue was something similar that kind of stumped everybody in California under their Property Tax Limitation Act, Prop 13. It was like a proverbial deer caught in the oncoming headlights of a car. But they figured it out how to be able to shift service fees, enterprise funds, and work And one of the key elements that they have engaged on in terms of revenue is the taxation of online gaming. And I think you would find a great support by the Silettes in this relationship because they're losing revenue. And if you just saw the report that was released by the National Football League, there are over $3 billion a year that are being spent on gambling now on the NFL. And these folks are working in what you would call a meta universe and are not being taxed by any jurisdiction or any state anywhere. And it is an opportunity for us to bring a solution set to our state legislature and maybe a possibility to fund some of the programs that you're talking about through a bond capacity and work that way. That's the kind of creativity and ingenuity I want to see us try to provide out of Lincoln County to our state legislature through our commissioners on into the state legislature. So I'd ask that you all put your thinking caps on and watch what other states and organizations are doing, because the solution sets are out there on a broader level. And I think that's kind of the focus we need to take in order to help ourselves too as well. Thank you for the elongated effort, but I wanted to share that with you.
And I had another question. What's this total station replacement?
Yeah, the surveyor's office has two main types of equipment used for surveying. One is total station, the other is GNSS satellite equipment. We upgraded our GNSS maybe 3 years ago. Our current total station was purchased in 1999. It is starting to become quite dated.
You got some serious life out of that.
Yeah, we did. And Christina was talking about the replacement cycle of IT computers and things. That's sort of a high volume thing that you can do part at a time. And Tom's done a good job getting us on a cycle where we cycle through all those. But we have two very expensive pieces of equipment that we're not really going to cycle them. We're gonna buy them and use them as long as we can.
Sounds good. I can't hold it in, I'm sorry, but maybe if you had to sell this to a different group, maybe channel your best Prince imitation and saying we're gonna survey like it's 1999.
Yeah. Do you have a best Prince invitation? I want to see it.
I got to work on that probably.
Okay, anything else on the decision
See the
package
worst
review?
Prince invitation.
We didn't discuss the reclassification of sheriff nurses, I don't think.
I was gonna mention that, that these aren't new positions, not adding people. This was a, I guess, well, I could call it a pilot project that failed a few years ago. We had 4 nurses budgeted, and we weren't finding nurses to fill those spots, as it's been difficult. So we reached out and kind of did some research and decided that maybe we try the certified medication assistant, is that right? To at least get the spots in here so deputies aren't having to administer the medication in jail, somebody with a little more expertise in that with a certificate. Ideally, 4 nurses is what we really need, but we want to try this because having 4 positions filled, even if 2 are nurses, 2 are CMAs, was more beneficial than just having 2 nurses. But we have had that open for a long time and have not had anybody. So Lieutenant Russell is like, if we can't get anybody in there, we might as well go back and try the nurses again, because ideally it would be better to have nurses. So while it was a cost savings for when we did it, we actually were previously budgeted for 4 nurses, and we just want to go back to the way it was.
You still have to fill them.
Still have to fill them, yeah. But if we can fill nurses, we'll be
Yeah.
ahead. But since that we couldn't get anybody in the door for the CMAs. So
Yeah, so it's not reclassing employees, it's just going back to trying to fill those vacancies.
yeah, and making them nurses and with
Yeah.
assumptions like Christina put, I mean, if we were able to fill them July 1, it'd be 47,000, but I don't see that happening either. So the assumptions in this would be, we're probably not going to spend the 47,000 next year, even if this is approved. Unless we get really lucky, and then it would be a good thing.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions or anything on the decision package review? Okay, we always need to come back to that some point, but Christina, did you want to go to your next slide?
That is all I had prepared. Our next steps, we will make any adjustments that come out of this meeting or anything subsequent to this, before we publish for the budget committee. That proposed budget will be posted and presented to the budget committee for consideration and deliberation. What comes out of that is an approved budget. That budget goes before the Board of Commissioners for adoption. And then we move into an execution stage process. So that's really all that I have prepared. This is really just our management team opportunity to discuss the budget assumptions and really kind of sharpen our pencils as far as what was going in there. Now, the rest of the funds are all balanced and budgeted. And we're there, while I don't have anything specific for those funds, we certainly can talk about those as well. One other element that we didn't talk about, but is an element of the general fund budget, is the general fund does provide direct support to other funds. Sorry, I'm again doing that. And just briefly, so that everyone's aware of that, that amounts to about $916,000. About $680,000 to public health, 55 or about 190,000 to community justice, and about 34 to radio communications. The general fund also receives some reimbursement outside of the indirect cost allocation from other funds, and this budget does contain $68,000 of ARPA funds for positions that have already been authorized, and some money from fair facilities for fair maintenance activities and administration.
In other words, Jack Whaley's supply of chewing gum and baling wire.
And are the indirect funds for like our contracts, that goes back to the general fund too, correct?
Indirect expenses do come back to the general fund, and for those funds that pay those indirect charges.
For us, the animal shelter selects and will.
Since you brought up Jack and his program, but he was explaining to me the other day that he's costing out improvement. I know he shared this with the commissioner, so it's not one individual, but that the cost of construction now, I mean, he said they're around $400 a square foot, which is like, wow, so that's another like sort of inflation thing, as how is that part of the budget coping with those obviously new.
Well, and I will mention that there is no capital in this budget at all, in the general fund budget. So any kind of capital improvements that would be general funded would have to come through a supplemental budget request.
But in line with what you're saying on is the inflation, we see it of fuel costs, we see it of food costs in the jail, all those things are huge. Have been there.
Yeah, I'll say, I hope we can get something in the way of capital projects going this year. And as probably most of you know, I mean, we've got a lot of things in the fire, the new Wellport HHS clinic, the big remodel of 9th Street and Lee Street HHS facility.
Animal shelter.
Animal shelter, yeah.
Those are all contained within the capital projects fund projects.
Yeah. So, and others down the road, the commons. But yeah,
That's a different.
But that's going to fund the
Okay.
construction of those
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
New EOC.
Oh,
Yeah. And maybe at some point, not immediately, but replacement of this building, because we come up in the 23 cycle, is it? State budget cycle, after decades of shoving off the cost of port facilities entirely onto the counties, they realized that, that counties did not have the resource to shoulder that burden alone. And under this grant program, they are picking up a portion of construction costs. Basically, I think it's projected on square footage.
Square footage of state use, so
Yes.
basically the third floor.
Yeah, in our current configuration, exactly.
And it isn't my understanding, or Tim can jump in here, that we are ranked number one as far as needs on that.
For planning funds. Tim, are
That's
you,
correct.
are you still on
That
that?
is correct. And I just read the letter, the transmittal letter from the Association of Counties to the Department of Justice identifying that fact. So we'll be proceeding that. But Christine is correct. As it pertains to the activities of capital improvement, we're going to have to look at a variety of different opportunities and options that we haven't entered into before in this county. These will have to be public-private partnerships. They have to be federal programs in order to get our capital improvement efforts moving forward. It's a different game.
Well, it sure helps, Tim, doesn't it, that finally the prohibition against earmarks is,
At the congressional level.
They're
Yeah.
not
Congressional.
earmarked as
Oh, they're called
congressionally
something else.
directed spending.
yeah, all right.
Yeah.
And we do
Yeah.
have requests in for those. I think we put some through, Jane, yours never went through, right? We couldn't find the right fund for it.
Right, well, yeah,
But you tried.
I tried, yeah.
Old wine in new bottles.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, any other, anything else from you, Christina?
No, basically, unless I hear otherwise, then what you see is pretty much what we're going to be putting in front of the budget committee. I can't tell you that I'm comfortable with it. It seems like we need to make some changes, but I definitely would welcome direction on that.
So are we talking material and services changes, or are we talking personnel services changes?
Well, let me give you a little bit of context. Of the general fund budgeted expenditures, the total that we have, I'm sorry, I'm looking at a different. The bulk of our expenditures are personnel services. So if you're going to make significant changes in direction on the expenditure side, it's going to have to come on the personal services level. Now, first and foremost, I think we need to have a formalized vacancy saving target. I think we played with that for the last couple of years. It's something that is relatively new to the county. They've never done it before, at least prior to my coming here. But I think it is something that we need to normalize and formalize as part of our thinking. It also has to become part of our operational pattern, though, too. If we are going to formalize a vacancy savings, it can't happen by accident. We have to make sure that we hit those targets. So far we have, but I will tell you from my perspective, it's because it just happens. We've been doing it just because of turnover, not because of any kind of overt effort on our part to do so.
And the difficulty of filling positions.
Yes. Now we can definitely build a vacancy savings into the budget. That is a standard budgeting practice. The question is how much, what does it look like, and how do we execute it are the key questions.
Well, I may comment on the vacancy savings. And I think there's a couple of different things that you're saying, Christina, that I need to understand. Over the last 2 years, we've been, especially not last year, the year before, we were in that 6-month waiting period, and it caused a lot of challenges for us in our office because it really wasn't prioritized. It's 5 people left in one division. Without going through a lot of steps, we had to wait 6 months for those 5 to come back. Last year, we changed that up, but it was still, even though I know what you're saying, even before we had vacancy savings, we realized vacancy savings without even doing it. There was always money that was turned back, but last year was on us to try to come up with that. So I'm starting out in the hole knowing I'm not going to fill this position then, I'm going to wait to fill this position. I'm gonna wait until this position because I wanted to try to make sure that we did it. And while that's not the complete challenge that we're facing with this, there's a lot of other things going on. It really started us off in the hole. And I'm not really, if we're just gonna put out there saying that this is the number, we're probably gonna come out estimate and put that in there, that's one thing, and we don't need to do anything. If we are forced to have to do that, I would rather just tell me, you don't have those positions, and I'll start cutting services, because it's much easier to do that than trying to continue doing what we're doing, knowing I got vacancy savings, then knowing people are leaving, and then knowing that just in 9 months of last year, and these are some situations with people saying, I'm overworked, and looking at the fact that in just patrol in 9 months, we spent $214,000 in overtime, not counting comp time, and in the jail, it's $277,000, not counting comp time in those areas. That is a significant amount that if we could get positions where we need to be, we wouldn't have the overtime. We wouldn't have people burning out. We got one person going to Tony's shop that came over here saying, I need more family time. They promised me no overtime. I'm going to go there. We got another person that tried patrol and jail saying, I don't want my phone ringing every day. And I'm going to go back to the fire services where I know when I'm on, when I'm not type thing. So we are struggling to where I'm very close to just saying, and I've challenged our teams, let's just cut services. What do you want to do? To their credit, they're like, no, we'll keep trying to do what we're doing, but we're seeing that that's having a detriment to their wellness, and it ultimately it starts contributing to how they're serving the public too.
So Curtis, I have a question for you from the day someone says they put in notice, like my last day is Friday, I'm done. And I know that when you have a new deputy, they have to go through training, and it's like a year until they're actually on the ground. So I'm not counting that, but from the day they say I'm out till the day on average that you have someone else in that position, maybe they're still going through training, but they're on the payroll. Like what does that typically take for you? 3 months, 2 months?
In patrol, if from the day we hire somebody,
That you hire, yeah.
if they have no law enforcement experience, no certification, they haven't come from another agency, it is really close to a year. It's probably over a year now because of the academy delays to get somebody solo and actually serve that we have to pay for. Again, right now, patrol is down 2 positions, but we also have an additional 6 that are in training. So you're 8 short.
So I get that. That's not my question. My question is not till they're ready to go on their own, but from the day Katie, a patrol person, says, this is my last day, I'm done. So
To get somebody in the
so you
door.
post that position until the day you have the next person on payroll, like recruitment and background check and like how long does that take?
So we've been keeping the positions open pretty much all the time. So we're on ongoing recruiting. And if you look at Lieutenant Berger's, he's got things kind of lined out with people sitting there waiting in the works, going through the process. But it takes probably 90 days to get somebody in the door.
Okay.
And then a year on that.
Okay. So even when you have a able and willing body, it's 3 months till until one person leaves, so you have another person on. And so if that's your average, you are having a vacancy savings of 3 months.
Correct.
By not wait, by us not telling you have to wait, you're already getting that 3 month.
And even before
savings.
the formalized, or whatever you want to call it, years before, if you look at our history, we gave back probably quite a bit, probably vacancy savings at the end of the year.
I think when we did vacancy savings previously, and it was a 6-month wait, so you couldn't put someone in that position for 6 months to recruit. I guess another way I look at it is, when someone says it's my last day, it takes a while. Even in a non-law enforcement position, to just recruit and get somebody in there and interview, and maybe you have a great pool, maybe you don't. All that takes time. And so I look at another way of looking at vacancy savings is just formalizing the period of time it takes to get someone in. So if we say, okay, we're not doing a 3 month, you can't refill it. We're saying from the day someone leaves, the new start date is 3 months from then, So you can recruit the day you have the opening, and you're kind of basing that on what it takes to fill somebody. Not that you can't immediately start recruiting, we're just kind of formalizing the time it takes to get someone in there, which represents a savings.
So my next part of that, may counter a little bit of that.
That's fine,
I-
yeah. That's okay.
Is
Yeah.
the fact that I wanted to, after looking at this, it's hard to bring this up, but I know a lot of agencies are doing, not adding to the budget, but doing an overhire situation where maybe it's 2 overhires in patrol that aren't in the budget, but it aligns us more to where we don't give back anything, but we have the staffing to not get into the overtime situation to do the service. And so, we're basically authorized maybe a +2. We'll never probably see that, but over the year with those timelines that you come up with, maybe we get back up to where our minimums are, what we're actually staffed to do. That's a couple of agencies talked to that had success. They actually are still running a little behind, but they know if they wouldn't have had data in there, they would be even where we are right now.
Yeah, okay, can I put that in the parking lot for just a second? I promise I will come back. Okay, Tony.
Well, I think also you just gotta look, instead of having mandatory 6-month grace period where you can't fill, you need to look at that position. I mean, we look at our positions. I got a guy who's been with us for a long period of time. I realize I can't fill his spot because I don't have the budget until all of his comp time is burned off, all of his vacation, all of those things are burned off. So, I got a guy coming up who's been with us for 20 years. And it's gonna be some time before I can fill that spot. It might be a little bit more than 6 months, might be less. But I think that's the way I look at it. I look at it as, when can I fill it based on my budget? Now, fortunately, the new person coming in is gonna come in at a lower step. So right there's gonna be some salary savings also. So, I think you need to take that into account instead of having a mandatory 6-month period or whatever it is.
Yeah, I would just ask that if we do consider a vacancy savings program, that those positions that are not tapping the general fund be excluded. And of course, I'm thinking of the HHS positions, maybe transit, where, we have obligations to achieve a certain number of encounters to continue to draw down the revenue that we draw down. So if we're outside of the general fund budget, then, I'm just sort of hoping that this wouldn't sort of be an across the board kind of program.
And that's what I do. Yeah, I mean, I look at it, I'm outside of state, I'm with the state, but yet, from a budget standpoint, I realize I'm gonna run out of money if I don't wait till I have the money to be able to pay for those positions. And I understand every year I don't get an automatic step increase or COLA increase included, and I gotta take all that into account.
And I finally have said in our office, just to fill the positions now, we've either have reached our vacancy savings, or the problem is the overtime is now counterproductive to what we're trying to do.
Got it. Okay, Claire, David, and then I'm coming back to the overhead thing. Yeah.
Yeah, question for Kristen to clarify, and I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure, is that siphoning vacancy savings out of dedicated funds for non-general, back into the general fund, in a lot of cases would simply not be permitted.
No.
Yeah, so.
The other thing to consider, again, when you're talking about vacancy savings, I want to toss out the reminder that the LCDA contract expires June 30th, and there is no provision in this budget for any increase associated with that contract. And the non-reps in that are now tied by policy to that. So there's no provision for those positions either. So when we talk about vacancy savings, in some cases that may just hold the line.
Sorry, I have my kid at home. He's texting me about us being out of food or something. So.
Multitasking.
Yeah, I know. Yes, there's more applesauce. Anyway, so I had a question for you, David. So I asked kind of Curtis the question about when it comes to public safety people, how long from when someone leaves do you actually, have them on payroll? When you think about, I guess the whole county, and I'm not going to ask you to think about people not on general fund, but just like everything, what would you say the average is from, leaving till getting someone on there?
Are you going to be the poster child?
I probably will be. Just in general. Like, is it
I would
90
say
days?
yeah, or more.
Okay.
I would say 3 to 4 months at least. I mean, it depends on the position.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, of course. That's why I'm asking
some-
for an average.
Yeah, I would say probably closer to 4 months, and Yeah, and I'd have to double check.
That's
just to be
okay.
sure.
It is really
Yeah.
positioned even in our office, because our support services didn't take that long. I mean,
Yeah.
to get somebody
Yeah.
through that.
I know, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, but the
Yeah.
certified positions, of course, the ones that have all the training and everything.
Okay.
But can
Yeah.
I mean, along those lines also, I mean, I do think that kind of like Tony's comment earlier, I mean, I think that we have to look at positions too. I mean, saying a 6-month hold on all, may not, always work. And not even just the ones that aren't general fund. I mean, I think that, a certain position, I mean, we'll take, Anna's current position that just opened up. I mean, that's something that we need to get. And if we put a hold on it, I suppose if we did what you were saying and had a 6-month hold and we're recruiting and said, well, it's not going to start until, I don't know, September, whatever, 30th, I guess would be
Or
about the
just
date
a
or whatever.
3-month hold.
Yeah,
saying
I mean, that would,
start date is
but
June
But
1.
then if you look at, again, what Tony was saying, I mean, his person had, a ton, of sick leave that he got, half of. He had a full bank of vacation. I mean, so there is no savings.
Yeah.
I mean, and you don't want to have that person. I mean, I want to say when I looked at that vacancy, we're probably paying roughly another 6 months. I mean,
Yeah.
so to get even a 7%, I mean, you're adding
Yeah.
another 3 months or so on top. I mean, so just kind of.
What you're saying.
But just, I think most people might be aware, but and on a shop can't function without a building
Yeah,
inspector.
exactly.
And even in the
Critical.
short time since Al retired, aren't things beginning to stack up a little bit?
Well,
And so
it just shows that,
Yeah.
that's the good news for me as a manager, is if something's wrong, I'm gonna know it almost within a couple of days, because the wheels will start clanging, because the integrated nature of the
Well,
department.
and
Yeah.
that's a very difficult position to fill.
And it's a difficult position to fill, but it's kind of a one-off in terms of how much time and such and such. And of course, to state the obvious, the new individual hired wouldn't have all of that senior, we've said this before, right? That the replacement of that is not likely to be, there'll be some in effect savings there.
And but then on the expense side, we're going to have to do
Contract it out,
contractual
yeah. Oh, yeah,
services
yeah,
until it's
yeah.
filled full time.
Yeah.
And in like Public Works, where we had somebody who gave us, a lot of notice. I think we're gonna probably have maybe a small gap, because I believe we have somebody now. But if they would have just, given us, I mean, even a month, we would have been, Roy would have been underwater.
This is Lainey. Can you guys hear me?
Hear you.
I have a couple of thoughts about the vacancy savings. So when we did that before, it really hurt the DA's office a lot. I know it hurt all departments, but it hurt the DA's office a lot because we have so much turnover, and similar to Sheriff Landers. And one of the things that I have a hard time with is, we're doing this vacancy savings, and then we get to the end of the fiscal year and other departments are over budget. And we've been trying to, manage without enough staff to, cover court and do trials. And we did 87 jury trials between March 2020 and now. And doing that without being fully staffed with lawyers was pretty challenging. And I'm gonna speak very frankly, and I'm not trying to insult anybody, but it's challenging for me when we have to do the vacancy savings and then I see county council's budget is over by $200,000. And so I guess what I would say is, for at least elected officials, our obligation is to the public. And if we have an approved budget, I don't think that elected officials should be required to not hire people. I think that we should get to make the decision. If you say this is the amount of money you have to use, I should be able to make the decision about where I want to make cuts, because I would rather cut other positions or services and have enough DDAs to cover court than not fill a DDA position for more than 6 months. So that's kind of just my thought about that. The reason I say elected officials is because we have certain obligations to the public that I think non-elected officials don't have. the commissioners obviously are ultimately responsible for department heads that aren't elected. But for us elected officials, I mean, we're ultimately responsible for that. So we have political liability, we have obligations to the public, we have statutory and constitutional mandates. And so that's kind of my pitch in terms of vacancy savings for at least elected officials. I think that vacancy savings is hard on every department. I recognize that. We all do important work. I'm just advocating for my department. The other question I had, I guess, is when I'm looking at the budget and I look at, I guess, how much money is allocated to county council, BOC, county administrator, finance, and HR. It looks like it totals over 4 million, which far exceeds my budget. And I don't know the answer to this, but can anybody speak to the percentage that we spend on those departments in relation to the overall budget? Is that consistent with other counties? Do we spend more money in those departments? And if so, why?
So first, Lainey, this is Kristen. I'd like to address, my budget was under budget significantly. So I was not over budget. For the total budget, I was under, and Christina can probably tell me.
We had some allocation issues.
By almost 300,000. So I was not over budget.
It didn't look like that on the sheet.
So I was under budget significantly.
Okay, maybe you can show me that, because I looked and it doesn't look like that. So maybe I'm not reading it
There
correct.
were some allocation issues that were just corrected by journal entry recently within the last couple of weeks.
So I was significantly under budget, but my question to you is.
So after I said you were over budget, then you made a correction to be not
No,
over.
I was never over budget. I was always significantly under budget. But to answer your point, if you did comparable analysis of other counties, which we look at our comparables, so we look at Columbia County, we look at Clatsop County. If you look at those models, you would be able to compare the budgets and staffing. I think Christina's already shown that public safety takes up 55% of our budget.
Yes.
At least.
Right. And I'm not saying that public safety doesn't have enough money allocated to it. I'm just saying, like, for example, if you look at Clatsop County, they don't have county council. They contract out their legal services.
So they do have a county council. They also have.
It's a contract position. That's all I'm saying. I'm just asking a question.
So they have a staff county council, and then they contract a lot of their services. So Columbia County, do you know how many employees Columbia County has?
Kristen, I'm just asking a question, and the reason
you have to look at the comparable counties.
That's what I'm asking. That's what I'm asking you.
All right, so Lady, you can spend time doing that, but I'll give you an example, Columbia County, which is our comparable. Do you know how many employees we have at Lincoln County?
I do. Kristen, I'm not trying to be adversarial. I'm truly trying to understand.
So we have 500 employees.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna step in right now. Okay, so, Lainey, one of your questions was, money allocated to kind of support services, and I think, hang on, I think page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think it was page 6. The GF expense by function, I think that support services category, Christina, you had said that's IT, finance, personnel, HR, facilities, legal.
Yes.
So that's like I said, whatever page I said.
Yeah, and that's 19%.
Yeah. So that's where the HR county council piece, as well with IT, finance, and personnel, facilities, and legal.
So, but Lady, if you wanted to do a comparison, and I'm just going to give you an example, Columbia County. So Lincoln County has 500 employees. Do you know how many Columbia County has?
Kristen,
listen, so I'm just going to give you an example. They have half of what we have. They have 200. Okay. They have 3 county councils, so they have 3 legals. They also have an administrator. Clatsop County has an administrator and a deputy administrator, as well as contract services. So is Lincoln County out of whack? No. When we look at other budgets, our support staff budget is actually probably a little smaller than some other comparable counties. So I'm not sure even what the point of this is. We have to have support services for our general county employees. We have to have IT. We have
I
to have,
completely-
have to have HR services. So
I agree with you. I'm not being critical. This is just we're having a conversation about how things are allocated and where we can save money. And I'm just asking questions. And what I have seen.
My recommendation is.
Can you let me talk, Kristen? Can you just let me talk without interrupting me?
I would do some research before you make these statements.
Okay, so Lainey, why don't you say one more thing and then I have a question for you. If you have something to say, and then I have a question.
No, I don't have anything to say.
All right, my question I had for you, kind of the same question I had asked Sheriff Landers and David just generally. So when you have someone leave, an attorney, not support staff, an attorney, from the day you know, okay, so-and-so is gone, their last day is Friday, how long would you say on average it's taking you from that person leaving and not being paid till you have someone else that you have in that position? Are you also kind of in that 90 days or?
No, we're a lot quicker just because the sheriff has a lot more things that he has to do to get his people onboarded and I don't. So for example, we have Mr. Thornycroft's going to Marion County. And so I already actually there's somebody that lives in our county who is interested in working in the DA's office. She's a defense attorney right now. But I mean, she could give 2 weeks notice and start. I mean, sometimes we have not found applicants that we like. And I think everybody runs into this issue, but it's housing, it's salary. We have a new DDA right now who the starting salary for a DDA in Multnomah County is $94,000, which is way more than ours. And so we're kind of losing people for that. And I know every department is the same. So, sometimes we have housing issues and things that slow things down, but typically I can get somebody in about a month if things run smoothly. I know HR has to do their process and they've been quick and I appreciate that. So, but no, it's not typically 90 days. It's usually probably 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. Thanks. Okay, I wanted to come back to what I put in the parking lot, which was the overhire. You want to maybe go into that a little bit and explain it?
Well, I guess where I'm going to is to, if we're budgeted 12 patrol deputies, 3 detectives, whatever it is, whatever the number is, that's, what we're saying we're budgeted for in our minimum, but and don't take vacancy savings in there, just those general vacancies, just positions. We never are at 12 deputies, 3 detectives. We are always running low. But that is really the minimum that we need to continue doing the service we're providing. So if we are able to do an overhire, my thought is that we would average what we are budgeted for throughout the year more than we are doing now, and then overtime costs would come down. Hopefully that would contribute to not as much burnout, and the retaining people would be better, recruitment would be better, and we're able to do it. At least a pilot project per year to see how it goes. We still have long ways to get to our minimum. So if you told us we could do it today, it would just give a little more momentum to finding the people and putting in those spots. But we're always on the board looking at who's thinking about leaving. And that's something that 20 years ago we didn't look at. And if we did have somebody leave, we knew we were going to have 100 applicants for that next position. But we really want to keep the momentum going. And I think hiring, what I've seen from other agencies, has done well to try to get to those minimums. And one thing that just spurred my memory, yesterday at the commissioners meeting, we had a good discussion about the drug team. I know Judge Bockhart is going to all the cities trying to get that going again. Question that the commissioners had for me was, you have 3 detectives right now, can use one of them, or one of them that was always kind of that side one, but as my leadership team reminded me after that meeting is actually that's where we took one of them and had moved to the comment position to put in. If you look at our org chart, we actually are listed as 2, even though we were funded for 3 detectives because we wanted that comment program. That is not up and running. I know HHS has had, you heard 40% down in mental health, but it's also something that if we go back to the drug team, that's going to pull in, even if we're able to, the comment team's going to get dropped off. So it's really squeezing that balloon if we didn't add any positions to do some of these programs that we want to do. We know that ultimately will help crime in the county and reduce the workload of those 12 general fund deputies that are out there are budgeted to move forward. So I know talking about adding positions is difficult, but I just want to throw that out there because that wasn't what I had indicated yesterday too.
Curtis, I thought comment was served by a patrol deputy, not by a detective.
We have the position.
Yeah.
Position. We moved one of the 3 positions. We still are allocated in the budget for 3 detectives,
Okay.
but we just moving positions around. We utilizing one as a comment, which is a deputy at a lower rate than it's not being paid the detective pay. But we just moved a general fund position into there. And since we didn't have a lint team, we moved it to comment at that point. If that makes sense.
So from a budgeting perspective, back to Christina's kind of saying, budget is all about assumptions. You said the assumption on an overhire would be that people are going to leave. That's the assumption you're building in, that you
Yes.
overhire, assuming
Yes.
that you're going to have it.
And I think historically we can show that people are leaving.
What other counties, you said there's other counties that are doing this and it's been successful, what ones?
I know specifically the one that really came to mind a few years ago, as far as the public safety, was City of Salem. They do that with both their police, but since I've been on the budget committee and also chair of the advisory board, I've been on the dispatch part of it, and they're actually, I believe it is +4 on their dispatchers, which they think they have 50 some, if my memory correct. So they are running, trying to adjust there, and it actually has worked well to keep them closer to full staff and reduce overtime than they had previously done. Now, they had run into a problem with market and a lot of things, for a lot of, especially since you're already in the valley, there's a lot of dispatch centers. You can stay living where you currently are and moving. So they had a salary pay issue that they had to address, that people were leaving to other agencies, but they still have the overhire in place. It was one of those things that was brought in as a trial program for that.
So would you, and maybe you haven't thought this through yet, but like, are you kind of thinking or proposing that, like you would do like a +2, like you have 1 opening and you try to recruit for 2, like what?
I was
So what
looking at
level?
+4, 2 for the jail, 2 for patrol, or a combination thereof for our office.
So the worst case scenario is, if you do that, is that they don't leave.
Yes,
It's like,
Yep, that's the,
yes, and we go over budget, yeah.
yeah.
Historically, I
no, right, just like all of us, if we're thinking about a grant source or anything like that, right, we gotta be.
Yep.
All right, if it doesn't come through, what do we do?
I mean, you're talking 4 positions. I can tell you with the 2 nurses, 2 CMAs, the executive assistant, and 1 other I was thinking about. We've ran 4 since last July.
I'm with you, Curtis, and I just, every time I can somehow do something to, retention, is
And that,
with complicated offices, yeah.
in 9 months, $500,000 worth of overtime.
Yeah.
It's almost worth a risk.
How many months?
Yeah.
9 months. Put that into context, the entire county expenditures and overtime is 550, so we account for $500,000 to $550,000 on our staff members.
And they're being burnt out.
Yes,
Right,
that's
that's the other one.
What's that?
I must be the
Oh,
other
there's a speckling, everybody here, but that's the fact.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not even the comp time. I just calculated on the dollars for the comp time there too, which obviously contributes to the problem because then they want the time off. Then,
Yeah, I think there. So, Claire, thoughts on that? Put you on the spot. so-
Yeah, okay. So we would budget according to everybody's best projection of vacancy rates. For instance, if you had a pretty good idea that somebody was going to reach the stage of their career during the fiscal year, that it would be their retirement age, you then budget a retirement savings for that, for example.
I guess I don't know. I don't understand the question.
Well, I'm saying, that, say next year, Officer Joe Friday is going to reach retirement age and so far hasn't given you any indications that he plans to stay beyond what would be his PERS retirement date, would you then be able to budget in for the fiscal year a position savings in that position as you then go through the
We have
process?
actually tried to calculate retirements and work with finance to actually add that in ahead of the fiscal year to make sure that that isn't going to be the problem. I can also tell you, and it was on the sheets that Christina sent out, that was a lot of great data, that like in the patrol division, because we are so young, not just in age, but in just steps of the budget, patrol is actually compared to current year's budget projected for next year at a -1% right now. So we're actually projected, without even vacancy savings, to be a percentage less than we were last year, and that's based on the fact that we haven't lost any positions. That's the fact just that we are low in the steps for those positions. And the jail was a plus, but it wasn't very much.
So Curtis, you just said you tried to project. Did you fail to project it accurately or?
For retirements?
Yeah, did it turn out okay? or-
We have done well with that, because we know some people, Brian Cameron was one long time, a lot of things that he knew when he was going, told us about a year in advance.
Nice.
We put it in the budget.
But that's not what your,
Yeah,
your turnover is what's.
Right, and but I was addressing
Yeah.
Commissioner Hall's question.
But the majority are people who are
Yeah.
moving to other
But
agencies.
I guess
or out of the
by
area.
looking at the projection for the current budget being less, even if those things are paid out, we're coming in lower for the year, so we're gonna pay for that this year because they're gonna be actually less, but that doesn't calculate also in that the LCDA doesn't have any cost of living calculated in either, which will push that up too.
So what was our methodology, Christina, in plugging in the 7.5% in recent years?
In the first year that I was here, which would have been the fiscal 20 budget, no, 21 budget, sorry. We did an across the board 7.5%. Didn't work very well. I mean, we did come out at 7.5%, but the actual department budget actuals were all over the place.
Excuse me, was there any methodology in setting that 7.5%?
Just what our historical
Okay. based on history.
our historical
Okay.
underspend because
Okay.
the county had a long history of budgeting 100% of their assumption.
Right, I remember.
And the historical underspend was
Okay.
7.5%.
So it was based on historical
Yeah.
trends, but as we've already been discussing, it's not even among departments.
Yeah, it varies wildly among departments,
Mhm.
yes. And last fiscal year, so for the fiscal 22 budget, sorry, I'm getting my years mixed up. We budgeted based on category. In the general fund, again, we are program level budgets. And so we budgeted 7.5% of general government, 7.5% of public safety, 7.5% of community services. But did not specifically out.
Right?
Huh?
We had lowered it to 6.5 this year, correct?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, it was 6.5 this year. So, again, that does put it in the correct program level budget, but doesn't necessarily assign it to any given department. Because again, it varies wildly. We have not established, like I say, we're kind of still playing with this concept. And so, in my past, we've made different assumptions for how we calculate that base level of personal services. Sometimes that vacancy factor is included, before you even start. Sometimes you're taking every position and doing a sophisticated analysis based on, the history of that position. I'm not suggesting we do that. It would be very difficult for us to execute with the systems we have. But there's a lot of ways to skin this cat. Many agencies will not fully fund a vacant position. They will either not fund it at all and then require a supplemental budget when it is hired, or they'll take a standard, that budget, that position, a vacant position is only funded at 50% or 75%, or, there's a number of ways that you can go with this. What the county needs is some sort of coherent plan, because vacancies will happen and we will underspend our budget. The question is, how much do we want to count on that ahead of time? And how do we make sure we hit that target when we do so?
Christina, I have a question for you. So I think it was fiscal year 20, I think, where we had the 6-month mandatory.
It was fiscal 21.
21, okay, I was off.
Or-
Yeah.
Yeah, 21, it was 21.
The 2020, 2021, and even 2022 are kind of blurring together.
Yes, they are.
And that was COVID related, is that what the 6-month was?
No, we
No,
talked
no.
about that. Yeah,
Strictly
It's
right.
the same issue of not having a big enough reserve in the fund.
My
Okay,
question
okay.
for you is, do you know what our, not projected, what our actual salary savings was in that fiscal year versus like what it is now? I think that is a helpful question.
Not off the top of my head,
Okay.
no, but I could get
Can
it.
you
for
work
you.
on that? Yeah, thank you.
Well, this may sound like the path of least resistance, but just to try and get the numbers toward a place where we want, what if we budget another 7.5% vacancy rate for the next fiscal year and then make an earnest attempt between now and the end of this fiscal year to actually develop a coherent policy on vacancies?
I think understanding from Christina, she said she didn't have right now, which is fine, what that fiscal year 20, when we, made it mandatory, like what it actually did. Because if it's the same as, 7.5 or very close to that, then that may not have done a whole lot. I mean, so anyways, I would just like to see the number. I think that would be helpful. I'm comfortable with making the assumption on what our average has been, which is 7.5. I think that's a comfortable assumption. I recognize that keeping those mandatory, having those mandatory salary savings with positions open for 6 months creates a really difficult situation, especially for public safety or departments that have a hard time recruiting. So I think I'd like to see what when we did it, what it actually did versus what we're seeing now. Before really looking at that, but it seems to me that maybe not so much with the DA's office, but definitely with the sheriff's department, that we're getting salary vacancy savings just in the time it takes us to recruit somebody, so there may be a way to at least make a better projection, on that, just based on knowing how many people, you're losing and what it takes to fill that.
And again, yeah, 7.5%, when we did it for 2 years ago, 7.5% was, almost $1 million of our budget that we need to try to save on that, which is, very considerable. And again, going back to the positions right now in patrol, they're down 2, but again, 6 in training that we're paying for, but aren't providing any service to. I mean, they're providing service.
Yeah,
It's not that they're useless. They are providing, but the training, and the so that doesn't really help, but yet we're 8 short. If you look at our, and so, I've kind of been working it through my mind that if we're subjected to another vacancy savings, that we're going to really have to look at cutting service, because again, the backlash is the overtime goes up. And then we're not giving back what we're supposed to. I think I estimate almost 500,000 savings this year, which is not close to what we need to make in the sheriff's office, but I'm seeing where the money went. It went to the overtime. That's difficult. And I can reduce overtime even with the vacancy savings by just reducing services. We won't have as many deputies out there on the road all the hours. We won't have to fill those shifts. It's harder in the jail because I can't just close up and send people home, but we can on the road. But that means, somebody's going to call and we already don't have service from 3 and 7, and maybe now it's going to be between 10 and 7.
Does state police cover those hours?
No,
They don't.
they don't even cover the hours we do.
So do they just stop at like, what, 2 a.m. or something?
If they have people on, yeah.
They don't respond to our calls for service.
They don't
in lieu of
respond.
us.
Because they're short staffed too, right?
They're
They-
short
They just
staffed.
don't respond to our calls for service,
Oh, okay.
Wow.
period.
I'm just thinking of,
And they have a small presence.
like in Lane County where the sheriff's unit is so small, that the state police has kind of taken over a lot of those service areas.
Not Lane, Josephine County they did.
Okay.
Joseph County has built back up
Yeah.
because they realized that the state police couldn't do it.
But at that point, had they just almost basically abandoned patrol?
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Pulled the
That's what I'm
plug
talking about,
entirely.
yeah.
So I mean, I will just say, like, my personal preference is not to do a, mandatory, opening time. I do want to see what Christina has from when we did it and what it got us there. But I do think looking at, our average time to fill a vacancy gives us a better assumption, of what that's going to be just from our own time to work through the process.
One consideration that wasn't discussed, but David can speak to is finding staff. So when you find a candidate and you say, oh, by the way, we're not gonna be able to let you apply for 6 more months, but you have somebody
Yeah.
that, is identified, that's.
Like I said, not my preference, but there is a cost savings, just working through the process. I mean, that just takes time.
Well, even now, you make me bring up another point, with the cost savings, we used to have where we would kind of, coincide our hirings to when academy is, because there's a sweet spot to when you hire somebody, you want them here maybe a month, maybe a month and a half, before they send them to the academy. So we would identify somebody and say, okay, well, the next academy class is July, we'll hire you June 1. So we weren't paying them up to now. But if we do that now, they have applications out, another agency's going to grab onto them. We just had our sheriff's conference up at Sawasham last week, and the director, the former director, since he abruptly resigned yesterday or day before, and the sheriffs think it's their fault because they're hard on him, but I think it was other things. Anyhow, we were all saying that, we have an academy class in May, the next one's not till September, but everyone, including us, is hiring people now. We can't send them through training and send them out on their own. So really, and their training goes a lot slower until they have that academy. So the state is also contributing to that. Until he left, he was going to try to make a push to get people in July. But again, that adds to that time before but it also contributes to the time that we're not realizing vacancy savings that we have to pay them for.
The other piece of that is we can't secure spots in the academy until we have a name.
Correct.
put in there.
Oh, you can't hold
No,
them.
so until you put some, can't hold spots,
And how many slots are in a training group?
40.
Ooh.
Make sure you're serious, right?
Right, exactly. And that's what happened. People were securing spots and then,
I didn't get
hired.
placeholders, right?
Yeah, and then they didn't run a full academy, so they definitely don't. So until somebody's hired in the door, that's when you can secure your seat.
How much, I guess, payout? Do we know, like, vacation and I guess sick for some folks? What is the average when somebody leaves?
It really depends on the tenure,
Like,
and there's definitely some offsets there too. So one of the things that things, you can start really getting into the weeds into this argument, but the vacation payoffs and the sick leave payoffs, those can be significant for long tenured employees, but we also recognize savings when we have employees turn before they're vested. And so those tend to offset each other to a certain extent, which is part of the reason why we don't budget for it. Is because, over time, and again, when you're looking at things over the long term, and we're a government, we can look long term, those tend to even out. And so again, you may be overdoing it if you're budgeting those, because we also do not budget the savings we get when somebody leaves and their county retirement contributions come back to us.
So Christina, just maybe for my benefit, in the targeted 8.8 and then the current request at 3.3 for the general fund ending balance, that has those compensated absences built in. How much of that is
Compensated absences, it's $1.5 million.
And you have to have that. So.
Yes. Now there's two schools of thoughts there. So I actually have two sets of numbers. The target with compensated absences on top of the 60 days operating is the $8.8 million. With the 500,000 and roughly 500,000 in debt service. If you assume that the compensated absences balance is part of the 60 days, then that target becomes $7.3 million. So it's, it's the difference of the $1.5 million. But even with that, the difference between the 7.3 and the 3.3 that we have, that's $4 million. So if we were within $1.5 million of our target, I would say we were probably pretty good and I'd be reasonably comfortable. It wouldn't be ideal. I mean, because clearly in the general fund, you don't want to be at the bare minimum of reserves, but that is where we have been for the last couple of years. And that is what we are looking at now. So the question is this group and our elected officials and budget committee going to be comfortable with this margin? My suspicion is no. So then the question is, what do we do about it?
Well, the blue sky piece of this would be following up on Tim's optimism and these other sources, right? That ultimately would be the approach, right? We'd have to feel comfortable that
Yes,
that
and
was
again,
realistic, that what
those
we're
things
doing.
are all possible, but they take time.
Yep.
And when they happen, we can certainly add them into the budget and into our future projections as well. Because when you get a stable grant source, something that you can pretty much count on renewing over and over and over again, that's great. We can include those things in the budget. But if you told me today that you were going to get $2 million in planning money, I would say, where's the award letter before I put it in here? I mean, that would be
We
my
did have that
recommendation.
conversation, not
Yeah.
one, It wasn't 2 million, it was 190K, right? Yeah.
But you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So again, it's not to say that any of this will come to pass, but our budget is our assumption based on what we know now and what we're assuming now. So what do we want that assumption to look like? And right now, it doesn't look so rosy.
Commissioner Jacobson?
Yep.
Thank you. I'd like to ask Christina a question, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Christina, is there, based upon the point that you were making about a personnel strategy, are there other counties that have examples that we could acquire to see what they have done, whether it's in Oregon or nationally, and enable us to look at some of the questions that have been posed here today?
Not that I've explored, but I could look into it. But what I would caution is that it's unlikely that I would come to anything to bring back to this group in the 2 weeks that we have to finalize the proposed budget.
Well, in the case of a sense of urgency, I think it's tantamount that we pursue. So I'll help you in that regard, because I think it's important that we get that. The other thing I would like to also ask Commissioner Jacobson, to Sheriff Lander's point, I'd also like to make a recommendation as we pursue this in concert with the budget. We undertake a projected revenue forecast, because if we have not done that, I think it's tantamount that we do. With the proposed goals of the commission, and particularly the discussion relative to capital improvement, as everyone understands, I think it's important that we comprehend what our abilities will be moving forward.
Yeah, I don't think you'll have that in 2 weeks, but yes.
I guess we're ready to move on then, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I will say, in closing, projections, there are some departments that did a really good job with projections in the general fund in terms of sharpening their pencil and really looking at what their expenditures were going to be. There were others that it looked to me like they just went with the budget. If there are areas where you can sharpen your pencil and make changes to your projected expenditures, that will help, both on the revenue side and the expenditure side. We've made some obvious adjustments You know, where revenue, our current revenue exceeds what the projection was, we went ahead and changed it. You know, those are easy. But there are others that are maybe may not be easy to us. You guys are the experts in your programs. You know what you do. You know how you spend your money. You have a better insight into how those funds are spent and what the year is going to look like than we do sitting in finance. We can only see what passes through the general ledger. So if you have those savings, let us know and we will plug them in and that will help.
Or the additional revenue.
Or the additional revenue. Either, like I said, there's two ways to balance any budget, revenue and expense.
Christina, our live worksheets and info still available, so it's left.
They are still available, but they're frozen. What I will have to do is add a column for you to make changes if you want to.
As for coming back to, so let's move on and go backwards. As for the overhired, let's find a time to sit down. And maybe you can do the same with Commissioner Hunt, Commissioner Hall. I mean, it gives me some heartburn a little bit, but I'm like up for the conversation. So
It also, you know, I think we'll know more, my understanding next week with the ARPA funds, because one of our requests is for basically 4 positions that if you kind of look at it, if ARPA saying they're going to pay for them, it reduces the risk because I don't think we'll fill all of them plus 4, but it would kind of, that kind of helps you with that.
okay,
Now, will those positions help with like the jail? How many people we're putting in the county jail, or? Because we've reduced the capacity of how many we have in the county jail.
Right, and unfortunately, the design of the county jail is that you could go down to, well, you can start closing pods, but now you're getting rid of another 50 plus people. The poor design of the jail does not help us by just reducing number of adults in custody to lower the staff. It saves us on some food costs and everything, but inflation's kind of offset that. Until we close a pod, we won't see a reduction in numbers.
But we did prior to the pandemic. We had a capacity, now it's different.
Right. Yeah, but staffing wise, whether we have 100 or 161, unfortunately, because of design, we don't see any savings in staff to operate it until we close a pod.
And I recognize that part. I guess the part I'm saying is it costs the same amount, but we're not able to put people in the county jail.
You're going to put people in the county jail.
Are you at capacity?
Okay, so capacity, COVID capacity or bed capacity?
Yeah, so about capacity. Are you still up? Okay, so you're still.
161 is our bed capacity, but that's put 4 people back in the room again.
So we're still at COVID
We're
capacity.
still at COVID. I mean, we're still wearing face coverings in the jail, so we haven't done that. But we have reduced restrictions. Kind of getting a little bit what I said yesterday at the BOC meeting. July 1, I think we're going to see a substantial change to not necessarily maybe the bed function, but the arrest function. And that's going to be because of Senate Bill 48, where I know it's going to outside budget, but it's really going to change the dynamics on people coming in. That it's going to open the door again for all agencies to bring in, because there's going to be a set bucket of people that are going to come in the door no matter what, are going to turn around and go right back out again no matter what. At least they'll get them in, get them processed, unlike we're doing now because of COVID restrictions. We'll get them into more services that way, but it's going to really help us with the bed situation that we're having now, because a lot of people aren't going to stay like they are now. So it's going to be more, I don't know what the word is. It's going to be a different approach to how we're managing the beds.
I don't understand that. So you said that starting July 1, you're gonna have a substantial change in,
Statewide,
people coming in, but then it doesn't change the bed capacity. So I guess I'm not understanding how more people coming in.
They're going to go right back out, but they're going to be able to be arrested instead of cited.
Okay.
So they're going to come in, they're going to
They're
be
not staying.
processed, and they're going to
Yeah.
stay. They're going to
Okay.
go right back out the door.
Got
There's several. Again, we won't know exactly until the Chief Justice issues her order, which should be this month. And then Judge Bockhart will issue her order specific to directing me on who to release and who to hold.
And then so what would change the bed capacity is COVID restrictions.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And then also
Great,
the
thank you
fact
for
that we have seen a tremendous behavioral improvement because we don't have a lot of cells that have 4 people in them. As you can imagine, putting 4 people in one cell, they don't sometimes get along if they didn't have to be with each other. So we have seen a huge behavioral improvement over COVID, if you have any improvements with COVID, because everyone's in single cells right now.
But we've seen a higher spike in people continuing to reoffend because what happens is.
Fail to appear, reoffend and everything. Hopefully, we turn that around with Senate Bill 48.
Yeah, well, that's part of the issues. The FTAs have increased a lot because we haven't been able to hold them and put them in jail for a minute so we can assess.
FTA is a what?
Fail to appear in court. So I mean, so my other question is with your pretrial, is that general funded?
Yeah, I think this is I'm sensing another conversation like this that needs to have. Okay, mark on that one. Are these, yeah, let's have a chat. Okay, Cinda.
So are these ARPA funds, are these continuing grant funds, are these like
No, one time.
Well, it's actually 2 times. So
Yeah,
we had
but, yeah.
one.
We
that
want
got
to be
last April.
Yeah, you can't create
That we
positions and
don't-
be able to fund them
No,
after
we
their
can't.
funds are.
There's also restrictions on how they can be used, so it's not just a free for all. There's certain criteria that you have to, you can reimburse yourself for certain expenses that you had because of COVID, so there is some opportunity.
And for instance, I made a mistake, because Tim corrected me when I thought that I might have 1 or 2 temporary, some staffing thing like the EHS, another planner. And I had read it wrong. I thought we had till 2/26 to expend the funds. And he said, no, that's the last audit. It's all got to go by 24. And it was like, if I had understood that correctly, it would have radically changed what I'd even done on my ARPA request. So, thank God, Tim, you were actually reading the details there. By the way, I got so much out of that last commission meeting when I just listened to the challenges you guys face with everybody and the folks in the state coming in. That was tremendous. For someone who just God, I thought I had challenges. So that was something if anyone wants to really get a crash course in your world, that hour or 2 was jam-packed with tremendous insight.
Yeah, we got to turn the old expression on its head and say, the grass is just browner on the other side.
All right, Christina, back to you. Yeah.
I don't have anything else. I mean, I'm basically at your mercy. I mean, this is not my budget. This is our budget. This is the county's budget. And it's only as good as the information I possess. And we're going to continue to go through and ask questions where things pop out to us. But again, you guys are the experts on your programs.
And compared to, because now I'm one of the old guys on this thing, the 10 years for me being here, 10 budget cycles, kid.
Yeah.
But it seemed like there were a number of years where we sort of were able to conclude in one day. We're not, we're hardly done here, right? I mean, there's more.
Yeah, so we don't have another of these meetings scheduled, but I think we need to. Yeah.
Do you think
I'm just asking the question, right?
I was going to say, I would say probably more informal meetings.
Okay.
Okay.
I have three kind of conversations on my list, at least, or not me doing them, but one is to follow up with Tim on some ARPA questions, jail capacity, and then follow up with you, Sheriff Lenders, on overstaffing and understanding.
And you with EHS, you and me.
Oh, yeah, gosh, thank you, Anna.
Oh, yeah, I won't forget.
Yeah, you won't let you forget. Okay.
And we're going to go back and go through our budgets again and do that exercise by when?
As soon as possible. I mean, I'm literally finalizing the document now because it takes me that long to do it.
We can get it done.
Yeah.
This way I can go home to quick one.
Okay, anything else for the good of the order here? Everyone's ready to go. Okay, all right, I will conclude the MTEAM budget meeting then. Thanks, everyone.
Right.